Welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast with me, your host, Pete Tigers. Today I've passed over my home river, the Tor, to visit a hotel based close to the banks of its sister river, the Torridge. I'm joined today by someone who has lived and breathed this river for a large part of his life. He's also owned and run the hotel where we're sitting, the Half Moon, for many years. He's seen much over this time, and I hope to learn a little about his experiences. I'm really pleased to be joined today by Charles Innis. Charles, it's wonderful to be sitting down with you today. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, and glad to be here. I hope you, what I say, people will find interesting.
Without a shadow of a doubt, there's so much that I want to talk to you about, but we're sort of at this reflective stage of the year where we look back on what has been. What are your thoughts on the 2024 season?
Well, initially, you're bound to say it's been, like so many rivers, a disappointing year on the Torridge, certainly for salmon. Salmon numbers on all rivers in England are declining at an alarming rate, and the numbers caught by the rod anglers on the Torridge this year is probably less than 10, which is really very worrying. Sea trout, I felt there were more sea trout in the system this year than the previous year, and 22, which was a drought year, we had a very poor year. Having said that, again, we don't get the numbers of sea trout we used to get, and certainly there seems to be a lack of the small sea trout, the peel. Our numbers for sea trout were down, and the few people who came to specifically to fish for sea trout at night, at times did quite well. Nothing fantastic, but it'd be nothing to a group of fishermen to come with 3, 4, 5 sea trout in a night's fishing, which in this day and age is quite encouraging.
Have you any thoughts on why the sea trout numbers were okay and the salmon's so poor? Have you any theories about that?
No, don't exaggerate. I wouldn't say the sea trout numbers are okay. I would just say that they're not quite so bad as the salmon numbers. If I knew all the answers, it'd be easier, wouldn't it? I don't know the answers. Whether the answers are in the high seas or not, I don't know, or whether there were the problems of the river, I don't know. But and also, you've got to remember that sea trout numbers from year to year do vary tremendously. You can have a couple of bad years, then all of a sudden, you'll get a very good year. I go back to the 1980s when the Torridge was very polluted. In the early 1980s, we weren't virtually catching any sea trout at all. And yet, in either 1986 or 1987, completely out of the blue, the river was stuffed with sea trout. And I mean that. There were hundreds in every pool. And our numbers of fish caught went from something like 20 or 30 in a season to over 300. Now, how do you account for that?
Wow, that's extraordinary. And it shows how resilient these fish are, aren't they? That everything we seem to do with pollution, like you say, and many of these other things, that these barriers that we put in their way, they still keep trying to run the river, don't they?
Well, what you have to realise is that particularly the salmon is an amazing creature. Just when you think it's gone, it will recover. You don't need many salmon to spawn successfully in the headwaters, and for the young to survive, to very quickly build up your stock again. So it's too easily to be depressed. You mustn't be depressed. And fishermen generally are very, very positive. That's why they keep coming back to fish, don't they? You've just said you fished for 2 or 3 years and you haven't caught anything on the Tor or the Tamar, and yet you'll still be fishing next year, won't you?
Yeah, just as optimistic, absolutely.
And fishermen are born optimists, and it's a good job we are.
You talk with great depth about the numbers of fish. Does that mean that you've kept detailed records over the years of number of fish off the river, the water heights, the rainfall, those sorts of things? And do you still do it?
Yes, we have detailed records. When I came back to help in the family business, my family bought the Half Moon when my father retired from the RAF in 1958. And in the early 1970s, I came back to help in the family business. My mother and father wanted to stand back and do less, and I came back to help my brother run the business. And from that moment, after about 3 or 4 years, suddenly in 1976, I remember the year, we'd had a drought year in 75 and 76, and suddenly in 1977, we started catching salmon in the spring in quite big numbers. And I started keeping a record, and I've kept that record ever since. Only 2 or 3 days ago, I wrote up the record book for 2024. So that is a record of the half moon fishing. It's not the Torridge, it's just the half moon.
I bet there are a fair few books, aren't there?
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. And so much of it is dependent on weather conditions. We talk about we've had a very poor year for salmon numbers in this year just gone. Only a handful of salmon caught. 1980, I can remember this from the record book. 1984, the half moon guests at the half moon, or a lot of fishermen in those days, caught 1 salmon. Move forward 10 years, 1994, which was a very wet summer, and the guests at the half moon, the anglers at the half moon, caught over 100. So don't write them off just because we've had 2 or 3 years with very low catches.
That's wonderful to hear. And like you say, the optimism, I think, will stay certainly with myself, and I'm sure many of the people actually listening. And as somebody we're going to come on to your running of the half moon a little bit later, but I'm kind of interested from, as you know, my association with the Fox and Hounds of managing people's expectations. Was that sometimes a difficult thing to do in those drought years, in those difficult years? And it's wonderful in the years when people are catching lots of fish, but did people sort of remain optimistic about those things anyway? And I guess there'd be a bit of rain and things could change quickly, couldn't they?
I saw the role of running a fishery, and people come to stay at the half moon 2 or 3 days or for a week, and they want to fish the river. They don't want to be told that the river's low and it's a waste of time and you might as well not bother going fishing. My role was to encourage them, whatever the state of the river, whatever the state of the weather, you've got a chance. If you've got the fly in the water, you might catch a fish. And it was surprising how often guests would go off fishing and I thought, well, that's a waste of time. They ain't going to catch him in today. And at the end of the day, somebody come in with a salmon, because in those days you used to be able to keep them. But, it did happen. So the role of the fishery manager is to provide encouragement, not discouragement. And that's what I've tried to do over all the years.
I think one of my most hated sayings is, you should have been here last week.
Yeah, but it's always the way, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. It's such wonderful. And when you feel passionate about somewhere, it's easy to pass that passion across to people, and that feeds them as well, doesn't it?
Yep, I agree with that. And then you go on to think to yourself, I often think to myself, why do people come back and fish this little West Country river when they could go to so many other places now? Access to so much easier to go abroad, to Scotland, to Ireland, but they still come down to fish our little West Country rivers. And there's something about our West Country rivers, there's a charm about them. It's not just catching fish. And the real charm of the Torridge is that apart from the bottom 3 or 4 miles, when you get from downstream from Torrington to the estuary, Bideford and the estuary, apart from that little stretch, there's no roads, no railway lines. You get down to the river and you're completely on your own. All you've got is the wildlife, farm animals, and that's it. And you don't find that on many rivers. I know you fish the Tor a lot, where you've got a railway line, you've got a main road running alongside the river. Well, you get on with it. But on the Torridge, we haven't got that. It's fantastic.
And I call the streams here honest as well. They're really honest. You know exactly what you're getting with them, don't you?
And I think with all the guests who've ever been to the Half Moon over the years, catching a fish was an event. They didn't expect to catch fish. So if they suddenly caught a nice 10-pound salmon or a 3-pound sea trout or a lovely day's trout fishing on the river, that was an event. It was special. And I think that's very important. Didn't happen every day. They weren't going to go out every day and catch fish. We had guests coming here for regularly, once, twice a year, staying in the hotel for several days, 10 or 15 years, never caught a salmon. I couldn't believe it, never caught a salmon. And you'll get some other lucky sod who'll come down, walk down to the river, come back same day with 2 salmon. Never fished the Torridge before. But that's fishing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's salmon, isn't it? They choose you sometimes, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I wanted to do before we move on to your story and your connection with the Half Moon, which we're getting a brief look at the moment, but what about yourself from a fishing perspective? And I know before we started recording that you talked about the cricket club and you're involved with that as well. And does that mean that fishing for the time being is more in the back seat for you than anything else right now?
Well, no, because I'm still very involved. I'm still very involved with the Torridge Rivers Association. I'm still secretary treasurer of that. Adam is the fishery manager here now, and he's been working at the Half Moon since the mid-1980s, so he knows what he's doing. But since the family sold the Half Moon over 20 years ago, because I'm a great personal friend of Adam, I still help him run the fishing. So I'm here every morning talking to the customers, giving them encouragement with Adam, and we do it together. And we do the management on the river, keeping the banks tidy, ladders in, ladders out, sorting out problems. So I do all that. When it comes to the actual point of picking up a fly rod and going down to the river, I've got the stage in my life, and I'm in my 80s now. I tend to sort of look for excuses not to do it, rather than for a reason to do it. In the olden days, when I was younger, because we were a family business and I used to do a lot of the chefing in the kitchen. And as soon as the dinner was finished and as soon as all the troops were fed, 8:30, 8:45, I'd be gone picking up the rod. Couldn't get down there fast enough. Now, I'm sitting in a chair. I can't be bothered to go tonight. That's it. I think it's just old age.
And I guess you're living vicariously through your guests as well, aren't you? When you're sending them in, you know exactly where you're sending them. You can probably envisage the pools where they're going to be
very
fishing.
Much so.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then you get the report back at the end of the day, and that's always a fun part of it as well.
I still get tremendous pleasure out of it. And every year, and I'm already saying to him, I've already said to Adam, I said, look, I've got to make an effort and fish more next year, Adam. So whether I will or not, I don't know. But I enjoy my trout fishing more now. Whereas, sea trout, I used to love my sea trout fishing, particularly on dark. But then I used to love going on my own. I like to go down, start when I wanted to, finish when I wanted to. I want to wait, I've got to wait another half an hour because Joe Bloggs up the river wants to fish that pool down. Now, I've got the age where I'm saying to myself, I don't really think I should be on the river on my own after dark, wading up to my chest in the river. So possibly that's another reason. I don't know. Sea trout fishing at night was my first love.
How would you, for somebody listening to this who's not done sea trout fishing before, how would you describe it and what it means to you and why you love it so much?
Why do I love it so much? I think when you're salmon fishing, you never know when anything's going to happen. You can fish hours and nothing happens, and all of a sudden, out of the blue. Sea trout, there's a little bit of an air of predictability about it. You can go down to the river and as the light starts to fade, you can as it fades and gets darker and darker, so your chances increase. And I always tell the customers here, the anglers who are going out at night, pick your spot. You're going to pick the most likely spot and be there at the most likely time. And the most likely time is just on dark. It's 1 hour after 1 hour after sunset. Do you know that?
Yeah.
1 hour after sunset. And I said, you pick the pool or the tail of a pool you're going to fish and make sure you're there at that time. And it does pay off. Yeah, and so there's an air of predictability about it. The other thing about it, it's a wonderful time of the day, isn't it? You know, the sun going down in the northwest sky and just a glimmer of light coming across the tail of a pool. Nothing quite like it. Fantastic. And of course, if you hook a fish on dark, well, it's incredibly exciting.
And it is funny, isn't it? Because I'm sure you've had the same many more times than me, that people would come back and they didn't like being out in the dark on their own a great deal as well.
You see in my book some of the stories I tell in my book. Yeah, and some people, they don't realise they have a complete fear of the darkness. And they don't realise that they get down the river, they can't hack it. It took me a long time to get confidence on the river. As a youngster, when I started, you start imagining things. You hear noise, a poacher. But now, after the years, you get the confidence and you do it without.
I used to have people, and when I used to take them out at night as well, rush everything through, and they'd get tangled up because they were rushing their casts. And one of the best pieces of advice I think I've given people over the years was, before you go out, practice casting with your eyes closed a little bit, slow it down, because that's one of the things, isn't it? It becomes a disorientation.
You're absolutely correct, Pete. The number of fishermen who go out, when it gets dark, they're rushing it. They're rushing their cast. I've never said keep your eyes closed. What I do say is slow it down. Don't rush. And don't try and be too clever. When you're night fishing, most of the time you don't need a long cast. Keep it simple. Absolutely. Avoid a tangle.
Yeah, at all costs if you can.
At all costs.
Yeah, if you can.
Yeah.
Do you have a memorable sea trout, one that sticks in your mind over the years that you remember well for whatever reason?
Well, I've only caught one double-figure sea trout. That was down on the bean fishery at the bottom end of the river, and it wasn't that long ago, 7 or 8 years ago. And I measured it against my net before I put it back, and we reckoned it was about 12 pounds. And I'm not joking, it did absolutely nothing. It was just like a log swimming around the river. But it was the biggest one. But you catch a hook, a 3 or 4 or 5 pound sea trout. They're fantastic sport, aren't they? Absolutely. Yeah.
And I know on the tour, and as I said, the Torridge is their brother and sister rivers, that I can catch them, I see them rising, I can kind of work out if it's a sea trout by the way they're taking the fly. But have you had much success catching them on dry flies during the day? Well,
I haven't done for most of the time. During the daytime here, we were too busy in the half moon running our establishment. But this season, we had 2 trout fishermen here, good fishermen. They had a wonderful day on the river. They were fishing the Brightly water, which is a river in middle beat in the middle river. And they came back. We said we had a fantastic day. Hot sunny day, everything river low. We've caught a mass of trout, 20 or 30 trout, several fish over 2 pounds, and we've had 2 sea trout, 5 pounds and 3 pounds.
Wow.
And that's on a dry fly on a hot sunny day. And yes, you can very often catch sea trout on a dry fly in the daytime. Yeah.
Yeah, mayfly can be a very good time for them.
Oh, it can, yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I walked into the bar this morning and saw the great big trout that's on the wall there. How big was that one?
That was about I don't know, 3.5 pounds. When the Innis family are on the half moon, to improve the fishing or the quality of the fishing, we stocked the river with brown trout. We put in 200 or 300 a year, all around about 3/4 pound, and they provide a lot of fun for the customers. There's no doubt about that, and I wouldn't regret doing it. As soon as we finished here, the owner who took on from us, he was interested in the fishing. I wouldn't say he was that good, but he put in a few trout every year, and he asked whoever was doing it. It used to be Roscoe Wright up on Exmoor, I don't know if you know him, Roscoe and Desmond Wright. But anyway, they put in 2 or 3, 4 pound trout, and that's one of them. So it wasn't a natural wild trout.
Right.
But having said that, the trout fishing, as you said on the tour, is completely revolutionised, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you go back to our time, 25, 30 years ago, you never caught a wild trout over 3/4 pound. Half a pound was good. Most of it about half a pound, you thought you got a good fish. Now, we are catching several fish, a lot of fish over a pound, several over 2. Only last week of the fishing season, on the last day, not on the Saturday the 28th, Paul Ashworth caught a salmon, and he said, I caught a 3.5 pound sea trout as well. Brown trout, sorry, 3.5 pound brown trout. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's exactly now you've been saying that. I was thinking about when I first moved to Devon 20 whatever years ago, and it was those fish were they were beautiful, but there wasn't that very occasionally I'd pick up a nice fish. But it seems, I don't know if it is some of those salmon beats that weren't being fished for trout, and that might have been the reasons, and where we get these drier summers where perhaps you might not want to swing the flies for salmon, that you set up your trout gear and are pleasantly surprised. And it may be, I've always felt that there often have been an untapped resource in some places.
Yeah, well, certainly, yes. I can't. There's certainly the size of the trout has changed on the Torridge. I can't put my finger on it. I could possibly say they're eating the baby signal crayfish. The river's infested with signal crayfish. Is the Tor infested with signal crayfish?
There are some there, yeah, there are.
Oh, we got them everywhere. Completely infested. So, I don't know. And again, as far as I'm concerned, with the half moon fishing now, and I help Adam look after it still, the majority of people, anglers who come here now are trout fishermen. Whereas you go back 30 years, the majority of anglers were salmon and sea trout anglers. Now the majority of anglers are trout anglers. And and trout fishing at times can be quite outstanding. Not easy. You don't see the number of trout rising you used to see, presumably because of the lack of fly life. And you've got to be on the river, and you've got to be thinking, well, that's where I'd expect to find a trout. And you're not waiting to see the rise. Even if it's a dry fly, they'll still come up, even if they're not rising.
Yeah, it's interesting. The conversation I had with Richard Miller, actually, I was talking about when I went to the Fox and said, look, there aren't so many salmon to go at. We'll go at them when there's some water, but the trout fishing is great. And we've seen this change, haven't we? That people are wanting to fish places like the West Country to catch some nice wild fish in beautiful places on stunning little streams. And that must be pleasing for you to see that transition from where I'm guessing that you were probably more salmon and sea trout focused, swinging that across, and people are wanting to catch trout, which gives you 7 days a week of fishing, whereas salmon might be down to the conditions a bit more, mightn't they?
The half moon fishery now is much more dependent on the trout fishing, on the brown trout fishing, than it is on the salmon and the sea trout fish. We still get the salmon anglers and we still get the sea trout anglers, and the danger is, Pete, because the anglers have got the feeling there aren't so many fish aren't so many migratory fish in the river, aren't so many salmon and sea trout, you don't get the number of anglers. You know, people say to me, oh, we've only caught half a dozen salmon on the Half Moon Beach this year. I say, yeah, but what's the fishing effort been like? Pretty minimal. Which is true, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and those trout numbers, like you say, and, for people listening, how I talk about my love for the West Country streams, and this is a wonderful example of it, that the trout fishing that you can experience on the Torridge, which I've enjoyed as well over the years, and how we're seeing this change and people are wanting to travel within the UK to experience these. So, yeah, make sure you have a look at the Torridge and the Half Moon as well as a result of this. But Charles, I'd love to, we've touched on a little bit about your history with the Half Moon, but can you take us back to the beginning? Because I've read your book, so I know the story pretty well. But can we come back from your father coming back from war and buying the place?
We go back to, father was the Battle of Britain pilot. And after the war, he stayed in the RAF, and in the late 1950s, he applied for early retirement. He'd had a posting down here, so as a family, we're living in North Devon. He then was posted to RAF Finningley in Yorkshire, so he went up there, and we all stayed down here because we were at Shebbia, 3 boys. I was the youngest of 3. We're being educated at Shebbia College. We stayed here. And it was while he was at Finningley, he applied for early retirement. And while he was waiting to hear whether he was successful or not, he was home for that summer and he met Billy Beale, the previous owner of the Half Moon. And father got interested in salmon fishing, spent some time on the river. And I always think that he then caught a horrible red, ugly salmon on the last day of the season, September the 30th, 1958. And I've always said it was that salmon that persuaded him to buy the Half Moon. And that winter, he and my mum decided to take the plunge and bought the Half Moon. And they moved in January 1958. And the family ran this establishment for 42 years. I went off to university, did a spell teaching, and then my mother and father were both struggling. Father was fed up with it, and mother was struggling with her health. And he said, look, if you don't come back, we'll have to think about selling it. So I came because I love my fishing. I spent every moment of the day fishing in those days. So I came back, and I came back in the summer of 72. And I helped my brother. Between us, we ran the establishment here for 28 years and built up a wonderful reputation. And at times the fishing could be very good as well. So I've been very lucky. And I've often said that I was one of the few people who went through the whole of my working life without ever having to travel to work. Which is quite something, isn't it?
Fantastic. And how was that for you? Was it a difficult decision to decide to take it on?
Well, no. Basically, I said that if it didn't work, I could presumably go back teaching again. But I was pretty confident. It was hard times early on, making it tick.
And did you feel that you looked at the business and did you want it to carry on as it had been carrying on? Or were there things that you decided perhaps we should make some changes to?
Well, I suppose one of the early, in the 1970s, that was just after the salmon disease, and the salmon stocks then were plummeting. And I, right in the early days, felt the only way to keep this going as a fishing in is to push the trout fishing, and that's why we used to stock with the brown trout, and that was very successful. And I suppose a lot of the time it was trout fishing was very important. But we built up a staunch and loyal clientele. It'd be nothing for us in those days to be sending out 12, 14, 15 fishermen a day. Some salmon fishing, some trout fishing, it was we built it up. It took a long time, but we built it up. And we had good years, and as I've explained to you, we had good years and we had bad years. But most people who came, they enjoyed the fishing, but there was more to it than that. There's something about fishing inns and fishing hotels, isn't there? They have a sort of camaraderie. It's wonderful, isn't it? And we'd have a house full of guests here, let's say in May, 15, 20 guests, and the whole lot would say, right, we'll all meet up for the same week next year. So they're completely booked in for the following. Marvellous. For me, that week was full. Yeah, so there's quite something.
And I remember I was in Barnstable and I saw a book, and I can't remember what the name of the book was, but it was written by somebody, I think, called Peter Harvey. And it talked about his fishing life, and it talked about, and I happened to pick it up and I looked at it, and there was a section on the fox and hounds, and I was dreading reading it because I was thinking, oh, he's going to say it wasn't like it in my day. But it was beautiful, and I tried to contact him, and sadly he'd died just a few months before, because I wanted to say, please come down, please come and fish with me, and it would be lovely. But he was talking about his experiences there around that sort of time. And for me, it was really, really interesting because people were there for the fishing, but of course you've got a wonderful bar here and the food. And I love the idea that all the fishermen would sit around one table for dinner. Were you doing something similar?
We all did, yeah. And in those days, when the Innis family ran the Half Moon, there was no food served in the bar in the evening. Nothing. Food was all served in the dining room. And it was a set menu at 8 o'clock at night. And there was a big refectory table down the middle of the room there, and all the anglers on their own would sit there, 8 or 10 of them, and then the ones with husband and wives were part would be tabled around the room, but it was a set menu, set time every night. 8 o'clock. If people wanted to go sea trout fishing afterwards, they had to get a move on. And there was no food in the bar, so the bar was purely for the locals and the residents to mix and have a drink in the evening. So it was, when you think about it today, I suppose you wouldn't do it today, wouldn't get away with it. I don't know.
No, absolutely. And it's fascinating hearing this story, but also how you were saying how you built things up and how hard it was to build things up. And we, of course, live in a world now where we've got the internet and you can do some social media stuff and all of those sorts of things to let people know what you're up to. What were you doing then to let people know what you were doing?
Nothing.
Wow.
Advert in the trout and salmon. Yeah. But of course, what turned it for us was 1976, which was the drought summer, wasn't it?
Yep.
1976. Do you know Mike Weaver, who writes
very well
Trout and Salmon? Well, Mike Weaver used to work for the West Country Tourist Board. And Mike Weaver rang me up and he said, Charles, he said, we're going to try and write an article. We're going to try and write something up to promote tourism in rural North Devon. And we've got Robert Clinton coming down, who was a motoring correspondent for the Sunday Express. And I suggested he stays at the Half Moon Inn. And Robert Clinton came here and stayed for 3 days. And he wrote a full page in the Sunday Express. So our reservation book, from being virtually empty, completely filled up for the year. And that changed us. Because not only did, some of them just came for once, but quite a few of those people came, and once they'd found the Half Moon, they became regular customers. But the one thing that turned it for us was the Robert Clinton article in 1976. Escape to this sleepy land of summer, something like that. Just a bit of luck at the right time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and listeners will know that I moved to Devon because of Mike Weaver's book, Pursuit of Wild Trout, and him standing on Cherry Brook, and that was it. And so he's had a massive impact on so many people. Yes, I still speak to him.
He rings me up and marks for the monthly reports, and bless him. Yeah.
Isn't that amazing how something like that can change?
It
And
does.
I guess what you were doing as a result of that, you had your regular people and then you had new regular people
Oh, yes,
who
fantastic.
kept coming back.
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
did you find that you were getting people from around the country?
Well, yes, oh yes, and of course, over the years, as transport became easier and movement became easier, we have visitors from all over the world. As you know, I'm sure you had the same at the Fox and Hound. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing, one of those things that can just change things.
And of course, a lot of them have become, long-standing friends. Christmas cards still change hands, and it's wonderful.
That's fantastic to hear, and a beautiful story as well. And so what happened from there? So things changed from that interview, and things just grew from there,
Things developed quite quickly, yes. Yes, things developed quite quickly. And I was very lucky that my brother wasn't interested in fishing. That was very important. Oh, you're not going bloody fishing again. But so if I knew, there was always one of us on site. We were a very hard working family. So that was very lucky. And as we built it up, we employed a lot of young staff, like Richard Miller you talked about. Well, I was involved. I was playing cricket at the cricket club. Apart from anything else, I used to play cricket. And Richard played. And I said to Richard, why not come and do a bit of work behind the bar first? I don't know, 2 or 3 years, I think. Richard worked for us. And we know every summer we either had somebody from the young lad from the cricket club who came and helped, or we had sons of people who've been staying here. Can they spend the summer with you? And they'd come and they'd rough it in and help with it. Some of them, all they wanted to do was fish. I never saw them, but it worked very well. Yeah, fantastic.
And for you, working at the hotel here, you're sort of kind of on duty the whole time, aren't you? Did that mean it was difficult in some respects to do that? Could you have a breather, or was fishing your breather that you could step away for an hour or two?
I could never go off fishing for 3 or 4 hours. We were totally committed to the business. We did everything. We had staff, obviously cleaners and staff to help behind the bar, but we did, my brother ran the bar, he did the organisation of that. My wife and I, did the kitchen, we did the office work. So very rarely would I go to bed before midnight. And the latest you had to be up was 6:30 to start another day. And my brother was up even earlier than me. He'd normally be down here at 5 o'clock in the morning. So it was hard work. And I think that's probably why I so enjoyed my sea trout fishing, because it was the one time of the day, got the troops fed in the evening, right, I've got a couple of hours, let's get down on the river.
Yeah. I think one of the things I used to love, and it's not quite in the same way, but I used to love sorting the beets out in the morning as well. Was that fun for you?
Oh, yeah. Fun. A challenge. Yes, you had to. We used to laugh about it. Somebody one of the youngsters staying for the summer. I said, "Oh, you talk to the customers and then send them up to me in the rod room one at a time, so I don't them all together. So I can then organise everyone who came to see me. I tell them they got the best beat for the day, one after the other." Yes, we used to tell little white lies. Get somebody, one of the regulars, where do you catch all my fish so brightly? Well, you don't keep quiet about that. You caught your fish up here at Sheepwash, and then all the guests will want to fish up here. So it went on. It was all good fun. Yeah.
And how much fishing did you have that you could send people out? How many miles?
We
of fishing?
had the Half Moon. When still has. When we sold the pub, we sold the fishing here at the Half Moon. The Half Moon here owns about 4.5 miles. Some of it single bank, some of it double bank. We're very lucky that where it's single bank, it's never fished on the other side, so it's not a problem. And then in those days, I used to lease quite a lot of fishing from lower down the river. A lot of the Torridge is owned by the Devon estate, and they lease it out. So we had 3 or 4 stretches of river, and then around about 1990, the Devon estate asked the Half Moon to take on the beam fishing, which is right down the bottom end, first beat up from the tide, really the prime fishing on the river. And we've had that for, since 1990. Yeah. So it's a wonderful benefit to the Half Moon, that is.
Yeah, it's legendary beam, isn't it?
Well, it is. And then even in the driest of summers, you've always got a chance down there, particularly with the school peel and the odd grilts coming in. Yeah, it's wonderful.
I think Richard on the podcast I did with him talked about his guest caught a fish and he caught a fish, and they had an amazing time down there. But most people who know the Torridge will know beam and know of it. And the whole experience then, from when stepping away from that, was that difficult when you decided to move on? Because your heart, and we're sitting in the hotel now, you're so close with it, the heartbeat of it all. But do you miss elements of it in any way?
No. I think having my brother was completely fed up with it, and he was from the house. So he's having to talk to the customers all the time, where a lot of the time I was out chefing in the kitchen. It was always hard work, but I can't track now, folks, I'm going to go work out of my... But in the end, we both got basically fed up with it. And also, my brother wasn't very well. His wife and my wife, none of them were very fit. And we didn't realise it at the time, but Benji's wife, not 6 months after we'd sold, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and she ended up being in a wheelchair. So it was really forced on us in a way, but it was a good thing. As it happened, Muir and I decided to buy a property in the village, so I was only 300 yards away, and Muir found it difficult because she'd been so much involved in it. It took her a bit of time to adjust, if you like. But I was very lucky that all the owners, since we left, this is the 4th lot now and the best lot, have asked me to continue helping with Adam with the fishing, which I enjoy. Gives me great pleasure.
I bet it must be lovely for people to be able to meet you, because you are synonymous with the Torridge. You are Mr. Torridge.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
And so, are you still seeing some of the same people coming back?
Yes, still a few left. Yes, they're getting fewer and fewer, I'm afraid. Anno Domini, but Brian Lovering comes down twice a year, and he was he first came in, I think, mid-1970s. So we got one or two like that. Yeah. And we got an awful lot of people, even if they don't come down fishing, they keep in contact with us. They want to know, and they're still members of the Torridge Rivers Association. It's wonderful. Yeah.
How many years did you run the hotel for?
Well, the family 58 to 2000, and I ran it with my brother from 72 to 2000, so 28 years. They're all stick, isn't it?
That really is impressive. And like you say, it's amazing to hear how you could find it easy to turn your back on it, because our friends Nick and Tara, who used to own the Fox, when they left that and sold it, it was very difficult for them. And you were describing your wife finding it hard to almost unwind, and they're so used to, because there's always something to do, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. And you've always got, life's a buzz. We're talking to people, moving about. But I've been lucky because I've got mine, as I say, help here Adam with the fishing. And I'm very involved with the cricket club still. So I've got a lot of friends in there, contacts there. And we're very involved with the Torridge Rivers Association. As you know, we've got our own hatchery, and that's just getting going again this year. So, I've always got plenty to do. In fact, when we sold for 2 or 3 years, I did 2 or 3 nights when the new people came in. they wanted. I said, well, I'll come down and do the chefing for you 2 or 3 nights a week. And I did that, and they were going to do it themselves, and they didn't like it at all. So after about 3 years, they appointed a chef, and that was music to my ears. I could say, right, I should never have offered to do it in the first place, so I opted out. Yeah.
Wonderful.
So I've always been involved with the Half Moon, yes, even now, very involved.
Yeah. Yeah, when I turned up today, Adam said, oh, I'm here to see Charles. And he said, I'll just give you a call. And it was the very short commute across the square to get here, which, yeah, I guess, like I say, the way I see it is that you're the heartbeat of the Torridge, or the heartbeat of the Half Moon, and long may that continue.
Yeah.
And if listeners have enjoyed listening to Charles and his stories, I was thrilled when you wrote your book, Torridge Reflections. Was that fun to do? And what made you want to do it?
It was hard work.
Right.
To be quite honest with you, Pete, I just felt that I had such a knowledge of the river, and there were so many stories to tell of all my friends and guests who'd been to the Half Moon, that and I thought I ought to try and put something on paper, and I'm so pleased I did. I had a computer, sort of one finger typing it all out. Dreadful, but I got there in the end. And I think now, looking back on it, is an important part of history. Because you were involved with the Fox and Hounds. When you think about it, when I first came help with the Half Moon in the 1970s, every pub along the Torridge had a bit of fishing. And it was exactly the same on the Tor, wasn't it? There were 6 or 7 or 8 pubs. There was the pub in the Black Horse in Torrington. There was a pub at Meath. There was a pub at Merton. There was a pub at Hatherley, the George at Hatherley. It was us. There was the New Inn at Shebbia. All had their little bits of fishing. That's all a thing of the past now. There's hardly a fishing inn left in England, let alone the West Country. And so those days when all the people could say, oh, they love the Half Moon, I'll pop down there and have a weekend's fishing, or let's go to the Fox and Hounds for a little weekend, or the Fortescue Arms, and these little places existed. And it was a good fishing in those days at times at very, very relatively moderate costs. And it's gone, hasn't it? I'm afraid.
What do you think that the reason for that is? Because I drive, when I go fish further down the Tor, I always smile when I drive past the Fortescue Arms as it was, and seeing these sorts of places. Why do you think that was?
I don't know. Times change. I don't know why. The Arundel Arms is still going.
Yeah.
We're still going, and 1 or 2 other establishments, but nothing really, is there?
No.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if it is travel and people's ability to travel
I think if people, yes, they've travelled further now, can't they? Whereas didn't you go back 50 years and the West Country was just in range, wasn't it? You know, they could get in the car and get down here for a couple of days fishing. Yeah.
And I guess we're seeing that change a little bit more, where you're seeing people now, like we talked about a little bit earlier, that want to catch a wild brown trout on a good, honest, beautiful little stream. So we're seeing that slight little change again, aren't we?
Yeah.
That people are, and I know when we were at the Fox that we were seeing people starting to come down and say, actually, I want to try and catch a wild brown trout from a West Country stream. Do you think it has changed where it might have been salmon and sea trout now that...
Well, as far as my knowledge of the Half Moon fishery now is that it's more a trout fishery than a fishery for salmon and sea trout. Definitely.
And so does that mean that you think that will continue with the brown trout, and that's what you're looking at more closely?
I think that's the way it's going to go. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I used to say to people, it's, we're going to be trout fishing, but if the water's right, we'll have a go. And I always describe it as some really fun wild brown trout fishing with the chance of a salmon potentially. Yeah. That's the way I used to sell it to people. Is that what you're talking about much more these days?
I know that we're going to change the subject slightly, Pete, but one of the changes is that the actual opportunities to fish for salmon when conditions are what I would say pretty well spot on are very, very few. In the olden days, when my family first came here, and go back to the 1970s when I came back, if you had a good river, and the river came up nearly bank high, you would get a week, 10 days salmon fishing after it. Nowadays, you're lucky if you get 2 days. So whether this is climate change or not, I don't know. But you've only got to see what happened here yesterday. We had over an inch of rain here yesterday in 3 hours. Now, I'm not being silly, but you go back when I first came, and you get this lovely sort of gentle light rain and drizzle coming off the Atlantic, and it would go on for 2 or 3 days. Oh, bloody weather, when's it going to clear up? But of course the river came up slowly, didn't get too dirty, dropped slowly, and when it got back to a fishing height, a nice colour. It so rarely happens now.
Yeah. And that may be the way that we're going.
Yes, and I honestly think sometimes we're too defeatist about it. I think if the truth were known, there's probably far more salmon in the river than you give credit for.
Do you think it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that people feel that there aren't going to be any salmon, so they're not fishing for them?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That's what people said. Oh, you haven't caught many salmon fish this year. I said, well, one, we haven't had many salmon anglers, and two, we've had precious little opportunity. It's when you as you're on the tour, when you're a fly-only river, it does restrict the opportunity, doesn't it? I'm absolutely against any other form of fishing. I can't stand the idea of spinning or worming or prawning or anything. But it does mean that your opportunities, when the conditions are right, are pretty remote, aren't they? And also, when you come up here to the upper reaches, and I'm sure you've seen the same thing on the Fox, you get to the upper reaches of the river, then your opportunities for fly fishing become even less and less. And so you end up going down to, we leased beats on the middle and lower river, and we got beam fishing, and we got the brimwockum fishing, because there you got more flow and you got more opportunity. I often said that when they made this river fly only from May the 1st in the early 1980s, you only fly only from May the 1st, all the poor fishermen at the top end of the river used to enjoy them going out with a spinner trying to pick up a sea trout or a salmon. Those days are over. Well, they were over legally.
So let's come back to Torridge Reflections. You said it was a difficult book to write, but you must have been incredibly proud that it was out there as a document, of the river, but also of your time and your association that continues, of course, with the Half Moon. And I've read it, I bought it, I've read it, and really, really enjoyed hearing that story. Were you pleased when it was?
Yes, I was. Yeah. All I'm trying to say, I was so pleased, and even now, many years later, I'm even more pleased I did it. But at the time, it wasn't a natural thing. I wasn't a natural writer. You know, it was a real effort. It took me, I think, 2 winters to do it. You know, I couldn't just sort of reel it off. And it was literally sort of I started off by doing it handwritten. And I thought, this is bloody silly. I'm never going to get this finished. So I then did it on a computer. And it was sort of, you know, and I'm not naturally at all. But I got there in the end. Hell of an effort, but I'm really pleased I did it. And even more so now, because times are changing, aren't they? In the last 10 years, times have changed. And it's a bit of history. It's there.
Yeah, absolutely. And if listeners have been fascinated by this, search it out, Torridge Reflections. I got mine, I think, from Paul Morgan at Cockybundu.
Cockybundu have still got them, yeah.
Yeah, so go search them out. It's a lovely document. And, you know, we're only touching on Charles's life, but there's so much in there that you're going to enjoy, and seeing the inside track, because I think people sometimes, and I think we saw it post-COVID, where people wanted to move to this part of the world, run a hotel. But with this book, you're getting the inside track of how hard, and today in the conversation that we've had, that you're getting the inside track of how difficult these things are and all of the struggles and of course the good things that have happened. So I can only shout loudly about the book and how much I've enjoyed reading it. So thank you. I'm so pleased you did put pen to paper and then finger to...
Well, I'm glad I did it, because as I say, it's a bit of history. And you've been involved with the Fox, I've been involved with the Half Moon. And these places are not like they used to be, are they? No. I'm afraid. Yeah. You know, the Half Moon, the new owners, and they're lovely people, and they're doing a really good job. But fishing now is a very small part of their business. Whereas when my family had the Half Moon, it was a fishing hotel, literally. Everybody came, 95% of the people who came were fishermen. You know, for 7 months of the year, buzz fishing. Yeah.
Wonderful. We're about to start winding things down a little bit now, and I think probably the last question I'd like to ask you is, would you change anything?
Change the weather. Change the weather. It'd be so nice if we could go, you know, I'm a bit sceptical about climate change, but having said that, times are changing. And, you know, yesterday's weather was a typical example. The rainfall now seems to come in very short, very heavy bursts, and that doesn't help your river at all. Farming's changing, and it's not changing for the best. You know, I look out on my bungalow, I look out of my bungalow over the lovely Devonshire fields, and you know, virtually every field is maize. And maize and rivers don't go together. It's frightening because, you know, maize is harvested late with huge machinery, it compacts everything, and then through the winter, what happens? The mud just washes into the river. The runoff of the river can be frightening. I'm sure you see the same thing on the Tor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Even in just the last few years as well, the last 8 to 10 years, it's got, and those lifts in the river that we have, the term fining down, I just don't really see it in quite the same way that I used to see now.
No.
And like you say, maize and has a lot to do with that, doesn't it?
Yeah. But having said that, I, like all fishermen, are the supreme optimist. And we'll be, in next month, we'll be trapping our broodstock in the fish parks at the hatchery at Moncampton, which is on the Ockman, our major tributary. And the salmon will be there. We'll get them. Everybody said, oh, there's no salmon in the river, but they'll be there.
I think that's a wonderful place to finish our chat. Charles, it's been absolutely fantastic, and I think we could have talked a whole lot longer, but it's been absolutely fantastic talking with you today. Thank you for being a guest on the podcast.
I hope people get some pleasure out of listening to it, and I hope it encourages them to come down and fish the Torridge, which is still a lovely river to fish, as are all the West Country rivers. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I always will shout loudly about the West Country, and it's been my adoptive home for quite some time now, and I'm extremely passionate like you are about it. For listeners, check out the Half Moon Sheepwash and look out for Torridge Reflections as well, see if you can get a copy of that and a read of that. But Charles, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Well, I've enjoyed it. Yeah, it brings back happy memories.
Wonderful.
And hopefully I'm good for a few more years yet.
I hope so too. Well, everyone, this has been another episode of the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as me. As ever, there'll never be any charge for these. I just love talking with people like Charles about their life and about how it revolves around a particular river or some water. So thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture Podcast. There'll be another episode coming very, very soon.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.